Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Komet, and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Jason. How are you tonight?
Pretty good. Lots of news this week. We're recording on Thursday night, and there's a lot going on in the soccer world and the world in general. So I don't know about you, but I'm actually kind of looking forward to just sitting and chatting about soccer for half an hour or so.
Yeah. I've been a little bit glued to my social media feeds all day, following what's happening in Jasper, of course. But earlier this evening, I saw the bombshell story from Rick Westhead for TSN about the Canadian women's team and Bev Priestman being sent home. So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind day consuming the news. But like you, I'm excited to kind of put that aside and talk about soccer at a more local level and a little less tumultuous.
By the way, if you are a new listener to the podcast, Scott, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
Yeah, we do talk about soccer on this podcast, but we focus it specifically on Calgary. So we talk about the amateur, collegiate, and professional teams and players from Calgary. We talk about Cavalry FC, the city's professional team. We talk about League One Alberta, which is the new semi-pro league that has teams in Calgary. And basically anything. So if there's a player who's, playing professionally overseas, we talk about them. We also interview quite a few members of the soccer community as well.
And this week, we're going to talk about the completion of the League One Alberta regular season, and we're going to have an interview related to that. We're going to have Diogo Raposo on today from Calgary Blizzard. We're going to also talk about Cavalry and their match against Forge last week. We're going to talk about their upcoming match on Friday, which will probably be later tonight when you're listening to this, against Vancouver. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Canada U20 and Calgary connections and a bunch of other little Calgary connections that we sort of have picked up over the last week or so.
This is Canadian FIFA assistant referee Mike Barwigan, and this is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Yeah, so I know we often talk about Cavalry at the top of our episodes, but this week we wanted to switch it up and talk about League One Alberta, which, as you mentioned, wrapped up the regular season last week. There are some championship games coming up, but Jason, these aren't really that meaningful when you think about what is at stake in these matches, are they?
I didn't really understand this until the season ended, but the men's champion in the regular season, they qualify for the Voyageurs Cup in 2025. So congratulations to Edmonton Scottish for pulling that off and getting first place. They will be in the Voyageurs Cup next year, playing probably against a CPL team. That's going to be pretty cool. And on the women's side, the regular season champion goes to the Interprovincial Cup, which is all the League One champions from BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. And that's coming up in a couple weeks in Hamilton. Basically, the big prize are these events, and that is completely based on the regular season. And the final match, the playoff final, really, it's for bragging rights. It's for, I guess, to say you were the champions, the playoff champions, but it doesn't really mean anything.
No, it's kind of the opposite of how the CPL set itself up. If you think back to 2019, where the 2-game finals after the regular season, that is what christened the inaugural champion. So this is kind of the opposite, where the regular season was the most important part, and the playoff games afterward were really not very meaningful. But Jason, I guess we're going to break some news in the sense that one of those playoff games isn't going to happen.
That's correct. The women's League One Alberta playoff final is not happening. It's been canceled. There has been no word yet about the men's final. I haven't heard anything specific that it has or has not been canceled, but we do know that the women's final, it's not happening.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions that you asked Diogo Raposo in your interview with him a few days ago. So I guess we could run that interview now and then discuss it afterward.
I'd like to welcome Diogo Raposo back to the podcast. Diogo's been on several times before with us, and he is the head coach of the Calgary Blizzard team that just won the Women's League One Alberta Championship. Welcome back to the podcast, Diogo, and congrats.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you having us on.
Let's start off by talking about winning the regular season title. How did the season go in your opinion? Like, what can you attribute your success to this year?
The season was difficult. The league, I think, has gotten better. As you see in the table, every game is tight. We've dropped some games that we'd like to have back. We also have gone through a bit of a injury scare where we've had 5 players have long-term injuries and out for the season, 2 with ACLs, 2 with collarbones, 1 with a broken foot. So that really tested us in regards to our depth, and we're lucky that we believe at Calgary Blizzard we have that, especially in our Major League program as well, who's undefeated right now in the South, and provided opportunities for players we know were ready. But because of our depth, they were maybe on a little bit lower of a roster. I think our training environment is very good, and that helps the whole group. Our Major League group trains with our League One group, and I think that just creates that competitive environment. And we know those players who are ready to go back to university, they're motivated. And I think that's it, just providing players opportunity, giving them a bit of guidance. There's not too much we can do in the summer months, and we want to provide them a break as well and not overburden them with information, overburden them with too many training sessions. Yeah, I think the girls took it upon themselves to make sure that they're ready and committed to the project. Obviously, a little bit of luck with, I'd say, St. Albert dropping points regarding whatever situation is going on there, and they probably would have finished first if they got their points back, and we would have finished second. But similar to what we did last year, we would have been ready to go for a cup final and had to go at it if that was the situation. It wasn't. Obviously, what happened with St. Albert, and we just wanted to make sure we take care of us and make sure that we're preparing our players for the next level. And obviously, we have some senior players who just want to compete, and some youth players who want to be at that level and really, really want to progress as quickly as possible.
You mentioned about a cup final there. So now that you've won the regular season championship, I think we're expecting a cup final. I think that was the plan originally, but what's going on there right now? Because I haven't seen anything really come out about any details regarding when or where or what.
Yeah, so the winner of the league gets to go to the interprovincial in August in Hamilton, Ontario. The cup final was just that, just a cup final. It didn't necessarily lead to anything or to interprovincials or anything like that. We've since been told that game has been canceled due to some conflicts with players and amount of players available for one of the other teams, as well as with it having less of a significance, that has been canceled. So we've been told that we are league champs as well as cup champs from that point of view. So obviously it's one less game. Our players, after playing 3 games in 6 days last week, are probably okay with having a bit of a week off as they prep for leaving for university.
Let's talk about the interprovincial tournament. So this is coming up pretty quickly. So this is new territory for the Blizzard for sure. So what's the plan to prepare for this, and how are you getting that all together right now?
Yeah, it's come on quite quickly, and of course it's August 9th through 11th, so we don't have a lot of time to prepare from both a roster point of view as well from a training point of view. As I think everyone knows, the league is probably 80 to 85% university players, if not more. So all of our university players will be going back to their schools. So then it's how do we put together a roster with our veterans who have graduated university, with some of our young players, as well as seeing if any university will release their players to come for this opportunity. I think I've had some discussions with university coaches who have said, like, hey, our players have earned that opportunity. We want to give them that opportunity to go to interprovincial. So we've been lucky that there've been some great youth sport coaches that are happy to support their players, but we know that's not going to happen with everyone. So we'll adjust. Like I said, I think our club is quite deep. Our youth is very, very good. We'll promote some of those youth players who have maybe played 1 or 2 or 3 games in League One, and they'll have that opportunity. It'll be tough. We'll see some of the rosters and some of the additions that some teams have added, but we'll give it a go, and we're excited for the opportunity.
Just getting back to talking about this past season in League One Alberta and going to this, winning the championship, and then going off to this interprovincial championship. So, kind of when you think about it from a big picture standpoint, I guess this is a real feather in the cap for Blizzard. So what do you think this means in the big picture for the club, what it represents and what it means?
Yeah, I think last year was, with it being an exhibition league, we wanted to make sure that we put our best foot forward. Obviously, we won the cup last year. We've now won the league this year. I think it shows that we have a commitment to the female game. We have a commitment to our youth players, and especially, again, our makeup of our team is probably 85 to 90% Blizzard youth players, and that's the way that we want it. Obviously, there's some additions from other local Calgary clubs, but we love the fact that we're 85-90% Blizzard, where they understand what it means to play for the Badge. They've been here since they're 8, 10, 12 years old. And I think that's important. And it shows now the pathway. And one piece that we are excited about with the interprovincial is that potentially there's NSL or Northern Super League scouts there. There's pro opportunities there in the future. And we want to provide that for our players. And I think Foothills had done a very good job, and probably the leaders there in their early years in regarding the female pathway. We want to provide our players with that same pathway to be able to promote players into the pro environment, and hopefully that's the Wild FC here in Calgary, but also any club in Canada in the NSL going forward. That's what we want, both on our female and our male side. I think our male side did great this year as well in their inaugural year, but we want to make sure a player who joins Calgary Blizzard at 4 years old can stay until they go into a pro environment, hopefully at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we can provide everything they need for that.
Before we wrap it up, though, Diogo, is there anything else you'd want to mention? Anything else you want to sort of talk about? The floor is yours for a moment if you have anything.
Yeah, I think internally, a massive thank you to our club, to our board of directors for believing in the project, for our operations staff, for the countless hours of setting up game day and making sure that we're organized. I think we do an amazing job from a game day, one of the best, if not the best, in Calgary, with food trucks, with obviously the beer gardens, with attendance. It takes a lot of commitment, and we believe in this league, and we want this league to continue to grow and to improve. And so obviously our job is, I wouldn't say easier, just putting a team on the field and playing and doing our best from that point of view. But there are countless hours that I can't thank enough to make sure that our players also feel loved from that point of view.
Thanks again for taking the time to do the interview, and you will be watching the tournament in Hamilton with great interest, and we wish you all the best at that tournament and beyond.
Thanks so much, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Diogo Raposo for coming on and doing the interview with us. Yeah, it's quite the end to the year. A bit of an unexpected end, but I think maybe let's just sort of recap a little bit about sort of what we noticed and what we saw on the pitch, some of the things that were notable. Scott, anything you want to start us off with? Because I think there's plenty of storylines that we can talk about.
Yeah, there are. I think on the men's side, Scottish winning, I don't want to say it never seemed in doubt, but they really, they took a hold of first place very early on, and they never relinquished that spot. So I think they're very much deserved winners. Like you mentioned before we ran the interview, they're going to get to compete in next year's Canadian Championship, which is super exciting. I was kind of hoping it would be a Calgary team, just because, if they are drawn against any team other than Cavalry, if you want to watch that game, you're going to have to, if they get a home game, they're going to, you're going to have to go up to Edmonton to watch it. But I digress. Like, great for them. They definitely had a strong season. But I really wanted to talk about Foothills, which I know I did last week as well, but they had such an impressive mid-season resurgence that I just kind of wanted to highlight this. So they, as we talked about, they started poorly. They had 1 draw and 3 losses in their first 4 matches. But then they won 7 of their last 8 matches. So they were unbeaten in 8. And their last match was a 7-1 win against BTB. I believe he's their captain, Owen Antoniak. He finished as the regular season top scorer with 10 goals. So kudos to Foothills for really pulling everything together. It's too bad it took them 4 or 5 matches to find their groove, because if they had done so earlier, maybe they would have been the regular season champs.
For sure. And I haven't really gone through all the lineups comparatively from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, but I don't think it was a situation where Foothills made like wholesale changes and, completely, remade their roster halfway through. It's essentially the group that I think they had from the beginning to the end was pretty consistent. So it just took them some time to put it all together. But, when they did, they were very strong at the end.
They were, yeah. And yeah, I can't say that I, really watched much of their play, but really, from what I heard from other coaches and stuff, like they, even when they were losing, it was clear that they had the talent, they had the quality to be contenders. So it was just a matter of, I guess, gelling or finding the right tactics, finding the right starting 11. But clearly, they figured out what worked and they embraced that. So if there is a final match, it'll be interesting to see how Foothills fares against Edmonton Scottish. I think that would be a really good battle.
Definitely. I guess on the women's side, and one of the things that Diogo mentioned in the interview was that St. Albert Impact, having those games forfeited or whatever ended up happening, we're not really completely sure. For the Impact to lose all those points, that really was a key factor in how the season ended up, because they were in very good position to win the regular season until they lost all those points.
Yeah, and the way it was shaping up to be would have been, St. Albert and Blizzard finishing top two. And as it turns out, Cali's managed to snag that second place spot. And as Diogo and you talked about, it seems like they've forfeited or something to that effect. So the playoff final on the women's side is definitely not happening. But in terms of how the season went overall, I mean, Blizzard, defending champs from last year, they're going to get to go to the Interprovincial Cup in Hamilton in a couple of weeks. You outlined here in our notes, they don't have a ton of players maybe who are available. And that tournament is really going to cut into the university preseason training camps, I would imagine.
I think for next week's episode, we're going to break it down a little bit further about who's available and who's not available. But as it was mentioned, like, some of the players from some of the schools might be available and some may not. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge putting together a roster for this tournament. But yeah, they have the AMSL team, which has done really well this year. So there's a possibility of utilizing some of the players that kind of went back and forth between those two teams and some of the younger players. But Blizzard had a good year. We still don't exactly know what happened with St. Albert. It's never been officially announced what's happened. The bottom line is they lost all those points. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I think the other thing I would just mention, I think Cali's for their first year, they ended up with second spot. I think that would be a pretty satisfying result from their standpoint for the most part.
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, they had arguably the best player of the season, right? Kendall Showers, scoring 9 goals for Cali's United. So clearly she was, a catalyst for their second place finish. I mean, overall, they finished second with, I think, just 5 wins from 12. So not the most impressive points total, but they were clearly hard to beat, right? They drew 3 of their matches, so only 4 losses, only lost 1/3 of the time, 21 goals against. Yeah, hard to challenge that Blizzard team for top spot. Strongest defense, not necessarily the strongest offense, only 20 goals in 12 matches, but Diogo clearly put together a lineup that was hard to score against.
But I guess we're not going to have that Cali's versus Blizzard Cup final, and that's unfortunate. And I did want to mention before we wrap things up, we'll be happy to follow up further with this story. I know that, I reached out to Alberta Soccer and to the Cali's, and I didn't receive any responses this week about exactly what's going on. So if anyone from there wants to follow up with us, we'd be happy to go over that. But yeah, I guess that kind of, with the exception of the possible men's final, maybe next week, possibly, that's going to be it for this year.
This is Dan Klum, and this is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, so we'll transition now to talking about Cavalry FC, who, as you mentioned at the top of the episode, welcomed Forge FC to town last Sunday. Hot afternoon, Jason. You and I were both there. 32 degrees, I think, was the high for the day. But, despite that, those tough conditions, these two teams produced a really entertaining 1-1 draw.
I think it was just, you could describe it as being sort of a classic Cavalry Forge matchup. There was a lot going on and it was really close, and it almost always ends up that the games are draws or 1-goal games. And this one was no exception. It was good entertainment value.
Definitely. The fans got their money's worth. This game produced only 2 goals, but I believe I read somewhere in total, the two teams generated 34 shots. 3 of those hit either the post or crossbar. There was a penalty save. There was a red card. Yeah, it was just a really good battle between 2 strong teams. No, Forge, they beat Toronto FC not that long ago. And even though they were kind of weakened, right, they didn't have Tristan Borges, they didn't have David Chouanier, and they didn't have Benny Badibanga, but they played pretty well. And especially in that first half, they were pretty dominant. They managed to put together 11 shots, 4 of which were on target. Kyle Becker hit the post. Marco Carducci really had to be on his toes a couple of times. If they were a little more clinical, this game could have been over by halftime. But second half was kind of a different story, wasn't it?
Cavalry really stepped it up in the second half, and I think right off the bat there was a penalty. Was it like 1 or 2 minutes into the second half? That, and even though they weren't able to convert, it was a sign that they were pushing forward and having some success.
Yeah, I think Forge's goalkeeper Chris Kalongo had done his homework on Tobias Warshevsky's penalties this season, because he's been perfect up until this point. He'd scored the 2 that he'd taken, but this one it was kind of a 6 out of 10 penalty. I think, like, he picked the corner, but it wasn't that in the corner, and it was kind of the ideal height for a goalkeeper to save it. So Kalongo not only made the save, but he actually held on to the ball, which is pretty rare. So disappointing, Cavalry penalty kick very early into the second half, but they did make amends just a minute or two later with a goal from Dan Klomp, finally getting his first of the season off a Camargo cross.
Sergio Camargo had a really strong second half, but the beginning of that second half, like, he was the one that drew the penalty, and he's the one that got the assist here. It was a nice ball in from him, and Klomp finally got one in the back of the net. He's, usually, I think last year, I think he got 4 goals or something like that, and most of the time off those headers. And there's been a few close calls this year, but that's the first time he got it in there, and it's sort of a classic Dan Klomp goal, I thought.
Yeah, very classic. A glancing header in just inside the post. It was really well taken. But Cavalry, they've had a propensity for giving up leads this season, and this one didn't take very long before Forge equalized. It was literally the next minute. So I think Cavalry scored in the 56th or 57th, and then Forge equalized in the 58th. So basically, they got the ball kicked off, and then not too long later, got a corner kick, and ball was in the back of the net.
Yeah, it was an own goal by Tom Field. And, I've watched that one several times, and I still kind of like, own goals, don't make sense a lot of times, but I just look at that one and I just think, how did that happen? Like, how did that work out that way? And it did.
Yeah, Tom Field actually tripped, and as he was getting back to his feet, the cross from Kyle Becker came in, and he was basically screening Marco Carducci. So he got his head to it, but obviously Carducci didn't see it till the last second, and it went in right over his hands. So yeah, it was a disappointing way to concede for Cavalry, and 1-1. And even though, no goals were scored after that, it wasn't for a lack of trying. Both teams continued to press and attack, and I don't know how many shots were taken in the last 30 minutes, but I know Forge hit the post. It was Noah Jensen, I believe, and then from Cavalry, it was Maël Henry. He had a really nice shot from well outside the box. I think it was about 25 yards out that pinged off of Forge's crossbar.
Mm-hmm. And Cavalry was really stepping up in those last 10 minutes because Forge, they had a player sent off, a second yellow, and so they were down a man, but they just weren't able to break through and get that winner, unfortunately.
No, but overall, I mean, like we said, a very entertaining game, and even though Cavalry fans were they had to deal with yet another draw from their team, at least it was a hard-fought, entertaining one.
And now let's look ahead to the match. It's on Friday night. So like I said, probably when you're listening to this later tonight, Cavalry's going to Langley, and they're going to play Vancouver FC.
Yeah, so Cavalry is heading west for the second time this season. More so than the game itself, which it's hard to kind of predict how it's going to go. Vancouver's had a fairly good season. They're in 4th place at the moment, and Cavalry is still in 6th place. But we got some news today that is definitely worth talking about. Cavalry has added another attacking player to its lineup.
Mm-hmm. They've added Lowell Wright, who, if you're following along with the CPL, he had a few very successful seasons with York United, and after playing for York United, they actually transferred him to Vancouver Whitecaps, and he spent some time playing for the Whitecaps too, and he was released. I don't know. I think it was in this preseason, like relatively recently, like within the last few months, and he's been a free agent available. Cavs locked him up.
Yeah, I don't know why Whitecaps FC2 released him because he had a pretty decent record overall. I believe he scored 7 goals in 18 matches, and if you think about it, he joined the team as like an 18-year-old, and he's still only 20. So that's not a bad return. So I don't know exactly what happened, but like you mentioned, he's been without a club for at least the last 2 months, and considering Cavalry's attacking struggles, I mean, it made sense. And I know that he's a player that you speculated could help them and could be available. So it's kind of cool to see another of your predictions come true, Jason.
Well, the problem with that though is we cut that out of the episode. I
Yeah.
I went back and checked. It was 3 weeks ago when we were recording that I threw out two names. I threw out Lowell Wright and Michael Petrasso as being two people that could be added in, and I just think Lowell Wright is the perfect person to add. He sort of fits the bill on everything you would want. He plays that center forward position. He scores. He's skilled. He's got a lot of upside. He's Canadian. He counts again for your U21 minutes. He just seems like a perfect fit. Like right now on paper, it looks really smart. We'll see how it actually plays out in reality, but I don't think there's too many other players that are Canadian players that would fit the bill for Cavalry better than he would.
I'm excited to see how he does. I don't know if he'll be traveling this week to Vancouver. It seems very soon, but if he does and if he gets on, I think Cavalry fans will be itching to see how he performs. It would be kind of funny for him for his very first game for Cavalry to be against Vancouver FC, the part of Canada that he just left. Yeah, I agree with what you said. I know his best season was in 2021 for York United, so it has been a while since he's been like prolific, but he burst onto the scene really young, didn't he? He was only like 16 when York signed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I expect he'll get a lot of minutes once he's up to speed. And one reason why he'll have opportunity for minutes is Cavalry released one of their attacking players today.
Yeah, that was kind of buried at the end of the press release about Lowell Wright joining, but Lleyton Brooks, former podcast guest, he and the club have mutually agreed to terminate his 2-year contract, which may be a bit surprising, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt maybe things weren't all that peachy in the land of Lleyton Brooks and Cavalry FC.
Well, you know how I just said a minute ago about how Lowell Wright on paper looks like the perfect addition for the Cavs? I think you could easily say the same thing about Lleyton Brooks at the beginning of this year. He seemed to have the right skill set. He had speed to burn. He seemed to be skilled. It really seemed like the right kind of player that you would want to bring in, but sometimes it just doesn't work. I don't know why it didn't work, but it just seems like it never happened. And, at the end of the day, when you're an attacking player, you need to produce and you need to produce goals. And in our interview with him, he talked about having a really defined number of goals and assists he was going to shoot for this year. But I believe the only goal or assist he got an assist in his last appearance a couple of weeks ago, in that he was the one who passed it over to Tobias Warshevsky for that goal right at the death when they in their loss a couple of weeks ago. So I believe that's the only time he actually he never scored a goal, right?
No, he didn't. There were, some close chances, and yeah, like you mentioned, his first appearances were off the bench, and he seemed to really be a spark plug for Cavalry's offense. He was beating his man to the byline. He was, cutting the ball back or whipping it across, and it just seemed like, man, this guy's going to have a great season if he keeps this up. But for whatever reason, none of those crosses or passes resulted in goals, and he himself wasn't able to convert the chances that he was getting. And you and I noticed as the season went on, like he did get some starts. I thought he looked pretty good. I believe it was the Vancouver Whitecaps Cup game. I thought he looked really good, but since then, or for a big chunk of the season, it seemed like he wasn't really looking happy out on the wing. He looked a little frustrated, and then he stopped traveling with the team on some of their road games, and there wasn't always an explanation given as to why he wasn't, in the 18 or in the 20 or however many goes. So it felt like maybe he wasn't getting picked almost. I couldn't tell you. I know that once the explanation the club gave was that he was ill or he was sick, but I don't know. It just felt like at the end, maybe he'd fallen out of favor, or maybe, there was disagreements. I don't really know. I'm just speculating, but yeah, that's why I said when I thought more about this contract ending that I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was at first.
I am Christian Greco-Taylor, and this is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
We're going to wrap things up with doing a few little updates about just various notes of things that have been happening in the Calgary soccer community. And also, we're going to update you on how some of our former guests, how they've been doing the last couple weeks.
Yeah, so I think to start off with this, we'll mention Christian Greco-Taylor. He's down in Mexico with the Canadian U20 men's national team right now. They're at the CONCACAF Championship Tournament, and he played the full 90 minutes in Canada's opening game against Honduras, which was a 1-1 draw.
Yeah, and he also got the start in their win against the Dominican 1-0. So they've got one more match. It's Friday night, and that will determine whether they move on to the next round. And I think when I worked it out, it's looking very favorable that they're going to make it to the knockout round, because I think if they get a win or a draw, they're in. And with the goals differential, I think even if they lose, they have a pretty good chance of being one of the third place teams that qualifies. But obviously, I think they'll be gunning for a win against El Salvador.
So another recent podcast guest of ours was Kareem Bashir Bey, who's from Calgary, but has been playing this summer with the Thunder Bay Chill in USL 2. They lost to Peoria in the first round of the playoffs. So a bit of a disappointing end to the season for the Chill after a dominant regular season.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're going to be disappointed about that. And I don't want to digress too far, but I did do a little bit of looking around after they lost that game. And the owner of the Chill says that he does not know if the team will continue. He said that USL has kind of implied they might not want them back next year.
Oh, wow. That's kind of surprising given their longevity and that this was a milestone landmark 25th season for them. And I know they had a lot of expectation to go on a deep playoff run, but that's quite the quote to drop after a playoff run.
Yeah, the article, and again, this is not the Thunder Bay soccer podcast, but basically at the end of the season interview, he said that USL hummed and hawed until the beginning of this year before they decided whether they were going to let them stay. And the main reason that they stayed is because the other teams in the division like them. And but the idea of having a Canadian team and the distance and travel and crossing the border, apparently USL has kind of had enough of that.
Well, I don't know how hard it would be to join League One Ontario, but I would suggest that having a team in Thunder Bay would be probably more feasible than maybe continuing to be in a US-based league. I don't know.
You'd like to think League One Ontario could be an option for them, but actually, I remember reading things in the past, and I don't really think League One Ontario wants Thunder Bay. It's too far to travel. They like their playing in that Southern Ontario area, and that would be a real long road trip for most of those teams. So I seem to remember, and this would be something that someone that knows a lot more about League One Ontario than I do, but there were other USL teams in Southern Ontario, and they were essentially forced to join League One, or they weren't allowed to be in USL anymore. But basically, League One Ontario said, yeah, Thunder Bay, you can do whatever you want because, you're far away, and that would be really hard for us to travel to.
So we'll just finish the episode with two last little mentions here, kind of repeating something that I think we talked about a few weeks ago, but now that it's right around the corner, we should bring it up again, which is Cavalry U21s are going to play against Fulham U21s in Kamloops on July 28th. So that's just in a couple of days.
Yeah, it should be interesting to, match up against a big English side. So that'll be cool. And then the other thing I think we want to mention is we talked about Tate Asante, who was with Cavalry last year. And we were talking about recently about how he was part of this FC Byron World program, which neither of us knew much about. But anyway, I did notice that it was announced that maybe it's because of the Byron program, I don't know, but he's going to go play NCAA at UNC Charlotte. So I guess maybe the exposure of that show helped him get that scholarship. So good on him. And I thought we would just mention that to sort of wrap things up today. Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can have this podcast downloaded to your device as soon as it becomes available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms. Check our website at yycsoccer.com, where you can look through our episode archive, find other options to listen, including our new YouTube channel. We also have links there to buy Scott's book online. You can leave a question or comment in the Contact Us section of our website. You can also interact with us on social media, such as Twitter or Instagram, where our handle is YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.